Hey everybody, it's SwankiVY. I'm making a video on my laptop, so I think the video might be a little bit grainy, but this is going to have to do for now. Today's video is about my upcoming book, which is tentatively titled So You Think You're Asexual, and the subtitle is An Introduction to the Invisible Orientation. I'm making this video well before the projected release date, which should be sometime in September 2014, but if this video is still up after the release, you can at least get some idea of what we planned the book to be and what it should contain. And it's possible that with some feedback from my publisher, the items in the book might be moved around or I might add content. But I figured what I would do is tell you guys a little bit about what the book is going to cover, because I know a whole lot of people are really excited about finally having a book for the asexual community that isn't an academic text and is supposed to be widely available because it will be distributed through mainstream channels. There already is one self-published book, which is by Asexuality Archive, and that was self-published through, I guess, Amazon's Create Space. So mine is going to be it's going to be in more mainstream places, and I think that that's really going to help reach a demographic that we currently aren't reaching. So without further ado, I'm going to discuss what the different sections of my book are going to be about, and just a quick overview of what they'll cover. The book opens with an introduction. I start with my own story and explain what it was like to discover as a teenager that I was not experiencing what everyone else seemed to be experiencing, and gave a little bit of understanding about my motivation for going from being an alienated teenager to deciding to become an activist about this subject. So I discuss my own experiences, and then I go into sort of some introductory ideas about what the book is supposed to be about, who it is for, which includes non-asexual people as well as asexual people, and anybody who's interested in finding out more about it for, say, academic or school report purposes. And I give some explanation of why the book was written, mostly a justification to explain, asexuality is not covered in sex ed in most places, and it's mostly, we live in such a sexualized society that people who are asexual or people who know someone who's asexual don't have any context to understand it. So the introduction is very short and just kind of introduces you to who's writing the book, why, who for, and why it's important. Part 1 of the book is called Asexuality 101. I give some basics, like a quick fact sheet at the beginning, and then I open by explaining that asexuality is a sexual orientation and what that means. I say it's a mature state so that people understand it's not what you call yourself until you develop a different sexual orientation. Although, of course, there are people who go through a phase of their life where they identify as asexual and then realize that that was not the right term for them, or that their sexuality is fluid, so I cover that. I say that asexuality is a description, not a declaration, not a behavior, etc. And I say that asexuality is a healthy state. That is not to say that you can't have an illness or a disability or some kind of condition and also be asexual, but I'm saying that asexuality itself is not some kind of psychological or physical condition. And finally, I wrap up and explain that asexuality is a reasonable possibility. It's not something that should be treated like a last resort diagnosis, because you don't get diagnosed with a sexual orientation. Nobody diagnoses you as straight. No one diagnoses you as gay. So it should be treated like it's a reasonable possibility, without treating asexual people like they have a responsibility to try to figure out what else, any other possibility they could be before they finally settle on understanding themselves as asexual. So that's the opening of the book, the first part, where I just go over the basics. Part 2 of the book is entitled Asexual Life. This section goes into all kinds of experiences that asexual people have, and it begins by discussing the types of asexual people. I begin by talking about romantic orientation, and it's a pretty extensive section that goes into all the different types of orientations that you can be amongst the romantic spectrum, and also covers aromanticism. I then discuss libido and masturbation and how that fits into people who identify as asexuals' lives. And then I go on to discuss intimate and sexual activity and kind of discuss the different types of intimacy that asexual people can want without it being based on sexual attraction. I discuss sensual attraction, aesthetic attraction, all kinds of different possibilities for what asexual people are willing to tolerate, what asexual people desire themselves as far as physical contact, and I discuss the whole spectrum of different experiences that people who consider themselves asexual may have. It's very diverse, so I go into all kinds of discussions of those. I go on from there to discuss also gray areas, which this is a topic that gets left out of a lot of mainstream discussions of asexuality because it's usually considered like beyond the scope of asexuality, and it's also kind of confusing for a lot of people. But it makes sense that there are always gray areas for any kind of orientation. There's always maybe people who have a primarily asexual experience in their lives, but do experience sexual attraction once in a while or under specific circumstances. So I do talk about gray sexuality and demisexuality. I also discuss demi-romanticism and gray romanticism and how all these things work together. The next section of the part 2 that I discuss is called asexual relationships, and I kind of talk a little bit about a little bit of advice for people who might be in mixed relationships or might be an asexual person wanting to find another asexual person to be in a relationship with. And while I give the advice, I also discuss what the terminology is and just kind of give an overview of how asexual relationships work. The next subsection of my asexual life section is called Society, Discrimination, and Queer Communities. I think that this is probably going to be my most controversial section, and it was very difficult to write, but I did have quite a few people who were not asexual and were identified as something on the queer spectrum to read the section, and I didn't get any objections really to anything that I was saying regarding our discrimination experiences and prejudice and whatnot. I was really worried about that section offending people, and that's why I really wanted to check for understanding. So you can be assured that it's a sensitively rendered section, and that it has been at least vetted by some members of the queer community, so that I'm addressing it in an inoffensive way as best I can. So I do discuss the overall societal pressures that asexual people have to deal with, and how we fit in with and ally with and work with queer communities, what the attitudes are, discussions of privilege, and all kinds of very difficult topics. And then finally, the last part of the asexual life section is asexual community. And in that, I kind of go into all kinds of different subsections, demographics, intersectional issues, because as we should all know by now, there is not just one asexual experience. There are all kinds of kind of complicating factors if you belong to, say, another group that experiences prejudice or discrimination, or if you have a special experience because of your demographics that other people that don't match those traits might not be experiencing. So I kind of went through and highlighted a whole bunch of different demographics, subsections of the asexual community, and talked about their experiences and their special issues. So I deal with being young and asexual. I deal with being older and asexual. I deal with asexual women, asexual men. I have a section devoted to asexual people of color. I talk about if your romantic orientation is gay or somewhere that you would consider queer, and also you're asexual. There's a specific experience that goes with that. I talk about being trans and asexual. I talk about other non-cisgender or non-binary identities and asexuality. I discuss being asexual and autistic. I also discuss disability and illness, mental illness, any disorders as they intersect with asexuality, because there are lots of people who have a disorder of some kind, a disability, an illness, a mental illness, and are asexual. And that's kind of a special issue, because asexuality usually gets blamed for the disorder, or the disorder gets blamed for the asexuality. And there are larger issues where people who have any kind of illnesses, disabilities, mental illnesses, are often desexualized. So I discuss that. And then I also go into asexual people and entertainment. I talk about it in popular culture. I talk about the asexual community and some of its inside jokes, some of its symbols, and some of its famous people who identify as asexual, characters in media who identify as asexual. So I kind of go over some culture, and I also have a little section there about non-asexual people and their interaction with us, and sum up with like an asexual experience discussion. And that's the end of the second part. Part 3 is entitled The Many Myths of Asexuality, and many of these are things that I've addressed in my individual videos. I'd make a video for each one of these things, but they're all covered in the book, and then some. I start with a bingo card. You may have seen Asexual Bingo, my video, and or other bingo cards across the internet. So I start with that and introduce the concept, and then I go into some specific misconceptions and I address each one. I start with, aren't you using the word asexual incorrectly? And throw out all that asexual reproduction, all the jokes about that. I discuss why asexuality is not a fear of or a hatred toward other genders. I talk about why asexuality is not a dating failure. I talk about why saying that people become asexual because they're physically unattractive is incorrect and offensive. I talk about whether asexual people have a sickness or a hormonal problem. I talk about whether we are considered distracted by our lives or throwing ourselves into some other thing to care about, so we're too busy to have sexual relationships. I talk about did we just have bad sex and swear off sex. I talk about could we be suffering from trauma, and that's a very it's a sensitively handled discussion of sexual assault and abuse. I talk about whether asexual people could possibly be secretly gay and discuss the problems with that assumption. I discuss whether we've just not met the right person. I discuss whether asexuality is a religious statement, and also kind of go into some stuff about the experience of religious asexual people of various religions. I talk about why it would be incorrect to call asexuality a phase or accuse us of looking for attention or trying to be different. I talk about addressing, wouldn't asexual people be lonely all the time? I talk about why it's a poor assumption to claim that we're boring or dispassionate. I talk about whether it's fair to say that we're being selfish, and the whole aren't you a tease idea. I discuss whether we need to procreate and how that's related to asexuality. I talk about do we hate sex, or do we hate people who have sex, and attitudes, sex positivity, sex negativity, that sort of thing. I discuss whether asexual people should have to look for therapy to be fixed. Obviously, the answer is no, but I discuss also some, if you do want to, if you're asexual and you want to approach therapy, some things you might want to watch out for. I talk about why it is wrong to approach an asexual person by saying that their lives are so uncomplicated and they're so lucky to be asexual, and why that's a misconception. I talk about why it's not appropriate to tell people that they need to let an experienced or talented sexual partner change their minds. And so that's basically like an overview of all the misconceptions I address. And some of those have some nuances that I tackle in the discussion of each section. Part 4 of the book is called If You're Asexual or You Think You Might Be. This section, I anticipate that maybe asexual people or questioning asexual people might see the book and turn right to it. So I kind of give an introduction to how you tell you're asexual and kind of go into a discussion of some experiences you might relate to if you're asexual. And I talk a little bit about how to handle it, some reassuring phrases to help newly identified asexual people, and discussions of whether and how to come out if you choose to. I give hints on how to handle criticism, and I address the special issues of, like, what if you're a teenager and people keep calling you a late bloomer, and also some hints from an asexual perspective on what if you're in a relationship, how should you handle your relationship with a person who is not asexual, and or whether you want to get into a relationship like that. And then just some advice on where to go from here, just some resources of what you might look for and who you might try to connect with in order to feel more secure and more supported in your orientation. Part 5 of the book is called If Someone You Know is Asexual or Might Be. So this is the section that I think people who, if someone recently came out to them or they recently heard about it or they know somebody that they think is asexual, they might go get the book and turn right to this section. So I do repeat a little bit in the beginning and give them a special message and explain what asexuality is in kind of a abbreviated fashion. And then I basically just give non-asexual people some advice on what we would want from them and how they can help us feel accepted, how to acknowledge their existence in everyday life, what you should avoid doing and the kinds of questions you should avoid asking, how to determine whether it's okay to ask something, and also kind of how to deal with it if you've already said something that's offensive and like an asexual person might be mad at you for it, or to recognize that you may have said something that was inappropriate, and how to reconnect with that person to help them understand that you want to be an ally. So it addresses a special issue of if you're a parent of an asexual person, or someone much younger than you who's an asexual person, and why you shouldn't approach that as like you're too young to know what your orientation is, like what a good a good explanation of why that's not going to get you anywhere. And also for non-asexual people, I explain what if your partner just came out as asexual, or you want to date someone and you found out they were asexual. How do you proceed from here? Just a sort of a flipped version of the same relationship guide that I gave in the asexual section for purposes of people who want to have a relationship with one of us. I discuss how and whether you should ask questions, what to ask without making people uncomfortable, and what you should and shouldn't assume about asexual people. And that's the end of that one. And then the last section of the book is called Other Resources, Part 6. And that's really just it's a list of links and books. I open with some basic information, introductions, organizations, and frequently asked questions, mostly internet links that people can go to find more information. I have a section for discussion groups and networking and forums. Then some academic resources and some research collectives for the people that want to see the scientific studies. I have some downloads some links to brochures and educational materials, some published papers on the subject, book chapters and whatnot, some published articles on the subject, and some interviews. I also have a short section that gives links, mostly YouTube links, to professional media that has included interviews with or discussions of asexuality. And then I also have some just links to internet videos that are made by asexual people, like my channel and some other YouTubers that make asexuality related videos. I have a section for asexuality related blogs, and then I also list my contributors. I don't believe I mentioned it earlier in this video, but my book is actually punctuated with quotes that I was given permission to use from somewhere around 20 talented asexual bloggers, so that it's not just a single perspective that I'm offering here. And so I have a list of all of their names and their blogs, and then I just put my bibliography, and that's the end of the book. If you see this video and you've heard my overview and you're still wondering if I address a particular topic in the book and you'd like to find out, feel free to comment, send me a message, and I'll let you know whether and in what capacity I've addressed your issue. And other than that, I just hope I can keep you guys up to date on my book news. I have a newsletter, so I'll put that link in the description. And I hope that everybody who enjoys my videos is going to like what I've come up with in the book. So more news as it develops, and I'll see you guys next time.